In August of 1814, British soldiers walked into the White House, found a full dinner sitting on the table, warm, plated, ready to eat, sat down, ate every bite, and then burned the house down around the empty plates. The dinner was not a trap. The First Lady, Dolly Madison, had ordered it prepared for her husband, the President of the United States, who was, at that exact moment, not at the table. He was on a horse, in the dark, trying very hard not to be captured by an enemy army. The actual sitting President of the United States spent that night fleeing through the Maryland countryside, while foreign troops ate his food and torched his home. Then British soldiers walk in. One soldier looks at the food. British soldier: "Do we eat first or burn first?" Another soldier: "Empire rules. Dinner then, arson." Now pull back and look at the map. Here is the United States, young, loud, and absolutely convinced it is going to own this entire continent one day. And up here, to the north, is British North America, what Americans casually called Canada. Important note, this is not modern Canada yet. Modern Canada does not exist in 1812. This is British North America, especially Upper Canada and Lower Canada, places that would later become part of Canada. But to American politicians looking at the map, it looked simple. Britain was the enemy. Britain was across the ocean. Canada was right there. On paper, easy. A snack. A formality. A frozen British side door. So America took a bite. And then another. And another. And another. Here is what they skip in history class. The United States did not try to take Canada once. It tried before it was even officially a country. It tried multiple times during the War of 1812, and even after the US. Government stopped officially trying. Private American-based groups kept wandering north with muskets, flags, secret societies, and the dangerous belief that this time Canada definitely wanted to be liberated. After all of it, the final scoreboard reads, Canada still there. America missing one White House. So here is the mystery holding this whole story together. This version of America becomes an expansion machine. It buys Louisiana. It takes huge territory from Mexico. It pushes across a continent like westward expansion is a competitive sport. Land just keeps disappearing into the United States. But this one neighbor, colder, weaker looking, fewer people, right there it could not take. Eva. Why? And here is the part that will mess with you. The reason America kept failing up north is the same reason that border later became one of the most peaceful major borders on Earth. That connection is the whole story. But to get there, we have to go through frozen rivers, starving soldiers, eating leather, a general who surrendered an entire army without a serious fight, a battle America lost partly because its own reinforcements refused to cross a river, a dead Shawnee leader whose fall changed the frontier, 2 forgotten battles that killed the dream of taking Montreal, and one decision so smart it accidentally helped end the border wars forever. So hit subscribe now, while the map still looks simple. Because around the 3rd failed invasion, you are going to need someone to explain how a country this powerful kept losing to snow, rivers, paperwork, and people who did not want to be rescued. Let's go back to the first attempt. Before the United States technically existed. Quick question before we start. What is the fastest way to lose a war you think you are winning? Answer: invade in winter. Hold that thought. It is 1775. The American Revolution is barely a few months old. The colonies are not even a country yet. They are basically 13 furious neighborhoods with muskets, pamphlets, and a very strong opinion about taxes. And almost immediately, before they even win independence, they look north and think, you know what would help? More Canada. The logic was not crazy. Britain had taken Quebec from France in 1763. Quebec was full of French-speaking Catholics. The Americans assumed these people must hate their new British rulers. So the plan was simple. March in, liberate them, the locals throw flowers, Quebec becomes colony number 14. Britain cries into its tea. There were 2 problems. the Americans were wrong about the flowers, and they picked the worst possible time to find out. 2 American armies set off. One force under Richard Montgomery moves toward Montreal, and for a moment, it actually works. Montreal falls. The map starts whispering. See? Easy. Then comes Benedict Arnold. Yes, that Benedict Arnold. Before he became American history's most famous traitor, he was actually one of the Revolution's boldest officers. And he has a daring idea. He will march his men through the wilderness of Maine to sneak up on Quebec City. On the map, it looks like a clean shortcut. Draw a neat red arrow through Maine. Now zoom in. The clean arrow becomes swamp, freezing rivers, broken boats, rotten supplies, starving men. Forest so brutal, it looks like the trees are personally loyal to Britain. The men run out of food. Some accounts describe them eating dogs, candle wax, and boiled leather from shoes. At some point, invading Canada becomes extreme camping with muskets. Soldier, sir, what is for dinner? Officer, boot. Soldier, again? Officer, tonight with snow. By the time Arnold reaches Quebec, his army has been mauled by geography. The force that looked strong on paper is now a starving line of exhausted men who smell like wet leather and regret. And the French Catholics they came to liberate? They are not impressed. Because Britain, through the Quebec Act, had allowed French Canadians to keep important religious and legal rights. So when ragged American soldiers show up promising freedom, many locals basically think, thank you, but the current deal includes food and not being invaded. Nobody throws flowers. Then comes New Year's Eve, 1775. Montgomery and Arnold attack Quebec City. At night, in a snowstorm. In winter. Because apparently the plan was, if we are miserable, maybe the British will be too confused to stop us. It does not work. Montgomery is killed. Arnold is wounded in the leg. The assault collapses in the snow. Hundreds of Americans are captured. The survivors limp home. So that is attempt number 1. And notice the pattern, because it is about to repeat for the next 60 years. America assumes Canadians want to be saved. Canadians do not. America underestimates geography. Geography eats the army. America underestimates winter. Winter joins the other side. You would think they learned. They did not learn. 37 years later, America gets a do-over. It goes worse. By 1812, the United States is a real country. It has a flag, a president, a Congress, a growing sense of destiny, and a dangerous amount of confidence. The official reasons for the War of 1812 are real. Britain is stopping American ships. Britain is interfering with American trade. Britain is forcing some sailors from American vessels into the Royal Navy. And on the frontier, many Americans believe British agents in Canada are supporting native resistance against US expansion. So America has a Britain problem. But Britain is across the ocean. Canada is right there. And a group of hot-headed young congressmen history literally calls them the Warhawks. Have a brilliant idea. We cannot reach Britain easily. So let's hit Britain's colony. Canada is close. Canada is weaker. Canada is probably waiting to join us. What could go wrong? Thomas Jefferson himself says taking Canada will be a mere matter of marching. A mere matter of marching. Hold on to that sentence. It is about to age like milk in a hot carriage. The American plan is a 3-direction invasion. Detroit, Niagara. The northern route toward Montreal. Prong 1, Detroit. American General William Hull marches into Canada with a solid force. He has men. He has orders. He has a map. Then British Commander Isaac Brock shows up and plays him like a fiddle with a bayonet attached. Brock is aggressive, fast, and very good at making a weaker position look terrifying. But Brock is not alone. With him is Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader trying to build a native confederacy strong enough to resist American expansion. This matters, because to Washington, the war is about Britain. To Tecumseh and many native nations, it is about survival. Len village, families, the future, cornfields, trails, children. Then draw American fences and survey lines, slowly pushing closer. For the United States, this is frontier security. For Native nations, it is the ground disappearing under their feet. Brock and Tecumseh understand Hull's fear, so they weaponize it. Brock makes his force seem bigger than it is. Tecumseh's warriors move through the woods in ways that make American observers imagine huge numbers. Brock sends Hull a warning that once the fighting begins, he may not be able to control his indigenous allies. Hull has civilians inside Detroit, families, children, people who could die if this turns into a massacre. And Hull breaks. He surrenders Detroit, the fort, the town, the army. More than 2,000 men, without a serious fight. America's first major move in the war is an American general handing over an entire city to a smaller force that mostly scared him. British soldier. Did we just win? Tecumseh's warrior. Apparently, American soldier. Can we blame the weather? The first arrow does not conquer Canada. It turns around, and somehow Canada's defenders walk into American territory. That is not how invasion arrows are supposed to work. Prong 2. Niagara. At Queenston Heights, American troops cross the Niagara River into Canada. And at first, they actually do well. They cross. They climb. They seize the high ground. For one brief moment, America is winning. Then they need reinforcements. And the New York militia, standing on the American bank, refuses to cross the river. Their legal argument is simple. They signed up to defend the United States. Canada is not the United States. Which is technically correct and militarily catastrophic. Across the river, militia soldiers read paperwork. Trapped soldier. Guys? Militia. We support you emotionally. Trapped soldier. Can you support us physically? Militia. That may violate our terms and conditions. British regulars, Canadian militia, and Indigenous allies counterattack. Isaac Brock is killed leading a charge. That could have broken the defenders. Instead, it turns him into a martyr. The Americans are defeated. Hundreds are captured. America loses a battle it was briefly winning because half its army refuses to step over a line on the map. Prong 3, the North. This one is supposed to threaten Montreal, and Montreal is the big prize. If America can take Montreal, it can threaten the St. Lawrence River, split British Canada, and maybe break the entire defensive system. On paper, it looks brilliant. 2 American arrows move toward it. Then the arrows get lost, wet, sick, angry, and embarrassed. In 1813, 2 American forces are supposed to coordinate. One under Wade Hampton. One under James Wilkinson. They are supposed to squeeze Montreal. Instead, Hampton is stopped at Chateauguay by a smaller defensive force. Then Wilkinson is beaten at Chrysler's Farm. The Grand Montreal campaign collapses into bad roads, bad coordination, and defenders who understand the ground better. So now the scoreboard is ugly. Detroit fails. Niagara fails. Montreal fails. 3 directions. 3 disasters. The map keeps promising shortcuts. The ground keeps saying no. Stamp the map, not a walk. Now, to be fair, America does land real punches. On Lake Erie, Oliver Hazard Perry wins a major naval victory. This matters because the Great Lakes are not decoration. They are highways. Whoever controls them can move men, food, guns, and messages. Whoever does not control them gets to stare sadly at water while running out of supplies. Perry wins and sends back the famous message. We have met the enemy and they are ours. For once, an American sentence in this war does not end with, and then we retreated. The victory helps America retake Detroit. Then American forces catch British and native forces at the Battle of the Thames. The British line collapses. Tecumseh stands and fights. And Tecumseh is killed. This is one of the emotional centers of the story. Because Tecumseh is not just a dramatic side character in America's war with Britain. He represents one of the last major attempts to unite native nations against U.S. expansion in the Old Northwest. When Tecumseh dies, that confederacy breaks. No joke here. A native family stands beside a field. In the distance, American fences move closer. America still has not taken Canada. But one of the strongest barriers to American expansion in the region has fallen. That is the darker irony. The invasion fails north, but expansion west becomes easier. Then there is York, modern-day Toronto. In 1813, American forces capture York, then the capital of Upper Canada. They burn public buildings. At the time, it looks like a blow against British power. But Britain remembers. And by 1814, Napoleon has been defeated in Europe, which is the worst possible timing for the United States. Britain is no longer as distracted. British troops sail across the Atlantic. They land. They march toward Washington. At Bladensburg, the American defense collapses so badly, the retreat is nicknamed the Bladensburg Races. And that brings us back to the dinner table. The White House, the food, the empty chair, the president gone. Dolly Madison has fled after helping save important state papers and the famous portrait of George Washington. British soldiers enter. They eat. Then they burn the White House. They burn the Capitol. They burn public buildings in the American capital. Then, according to famous accounts, a violent storm hits Washington. Rain helps put out fires. Strong winds tear through the city. Possibly even a tornado. Because even the weather in this story apparently wanted a speaking role. Britain then moves on Baltimore. And there, the story turns again. Fort McHenry holds. The bombardment fails. A lawyer named Francis Scott Key sees the flag still standing at dawn and writes the poem that becomes the Star-Spangled Banner. So America's lowest moment helps create its national anthem. That is the kind of irony this war runs on. And then, weeks after the peace treaty has already been signed in Europe, but before the news crosses the ocean, Andrew Jackson wins a huge American victory at New Orleans. The biggest American land victory of the war happens after the war is technically already ending, because news traveled at the speed of wet paper. By the end, both sides are exhausted. The Treaty of Ghent ends the war. And after all the marching, burning, freezing, drowning, surrendering, and patriotic poetry, the result is almost absurd. Nobody gains Canada. Nobody loses Canada. The border mostly goes back to where it was before. Thousands dead. A capital burned. Armies humiliated. Map unchanged. The official American dream of taking Canada by force has failed again. You would think that settles it. It does not. Here is the part that feels almost too ridiculous. Even after the War of 1812, people based in the United States keep trying anyway. Not usually the US government. That distinction matters. The official American government eventually learns that invading Canada is not a great weekend activity. But private groups, angry volunteers, and political dreamers do not always learn at the same speed. In the 1830s, rebellions break out inside Upper and Lower Canada against British colonial rule. Some Americans look north and say the oldest sentence in this story. This time, Canadians definitely want to be liberated. Secret societies called Hunter Lodges form along the border. They launch raids during what becomes known as the Patriot War. One says, "Freedom?" Canada says, "Please stop entering." Again, Canadians do not rise up to join them. Again, the rescue fantasy collapses. Both governments have reasons to shut it down. Some captured raiders are punished severely. Some are sent far away as prisoners. The dream keeps failing. Then comes an even stranger chapter. After the American Civil War, Irish-American veterans called Fenians come up with a plan so wild it almost sounds fake. Invade Canada, hold it hostage, and force Britain to free Ireland. This is not a joke. This was a real plan. A bold plan. But a real one. They launch raids across the border in the 1860s and 1870s. It does not free Ireland. It does not take Canada. But it does something nobody intended. It helped scare the British North American colonies into taking defense more seriously. And in 1867, Canada becomes a confederation. Not only because of the Fenians, not only because of America. History is never that simple. But fear of American pressure and cross-border raids helps push the colonies toward unity. That is the deep irony. The invasions meant to break Canada helped create Canada. Every time Americans tried to swallow the North became more aware that it did not want to be swallowed. The United States kept mistaking quiet for weakness. But quiet is not the same as weak. Canada was not a single modern country yet. But many people there already knew what they did not want to become. They did not want to be absorbed by the United States. And every invasion made that feeling sharper. Now the story changes. Because eventually, the smartest people on both sides stop asking, how do we win the border? And start asking, what if the border stops being a battlefield? This is where the real turning point hides. Not in a glorious battle. Not in a burning capital. Not in a dramatic surrender. In paperwork, agreements, limits, treaties. The Rush-Bagot Agreement reduces naval armaments on the Great Lakes. Instead of filling the lakes with warships, both sides pulled back. Then the Convention of 1818 helps draw the border along the 49th parallel in the west. Fort by fort, gun by gun, ship by ship. The border becomes less like a wound and more like a seam. Then slowly remove their cannons. Then their ships. Then their angry eyebrows. One soldier says, "So we are not invading?" The other says, "Apparently this is called maturity." And that decision creates something genuinely strange. Today, the US-Canada border is often called the longest undefended border in the world. That does not mean there is no security. There are still laws, customs, passports, border officers. People absolutely still get asked why they have 12 suitcases and one suspiciously nervous dog. But it means there are not two giant armies staring each other down across the line. No massive wall of forts. No permanent military standoff. Which is wild, because this quiet border was once one of the most repeatedly violated borders in North American history. It took a failed invasion in 1775, a failed war plan in 1812, Detroit, Queenston Heights, Chateauguay, Chrysler's Farm, York, Washington, burning, unofficial raids, Fenian attacks, fear, embarrassment, and decades of learning the same lesson the hard way. Some borders cannot be conquered. They can only be agreed to. Bring back the opening image. The White House dinner table. The empty plates, the flames, the president gone. Now pull all the way back to the modern map. The US-Canada border stretches across the continent. Quiet. Straight in places. Messy in others. Almost boring. But it is not peaceful because nothing happened there. It is peaceful because too much happened there. And both sides eventually decided they were done. America reached north for safety with a sword and never found it. When it finally reached with a handshake, it got something no invasion had ever delivered. A neighbor it did not have to fear. That is the answer to the mystery. America failed to take Canada because Canada was never just empty land on a map. It was weather, distance, rivers, French-Canadian caution, Loyalist memory, British strategy, Indigenous resistance, militia politics, bad logistics, local identity, and ordinary people who did not want an invading army to explain freedom while standing in their fields. The map made Canada look easy. The real world made it impossible. America had to lose Canada over and over to finally win something better than Canada, a neighbor. And that quiet line on the map, it is not empty because history forgot it. It is empty because history finally learned to leave it alone.